A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms just put medieval tournaments back on screen. And most of what you saw at Ashford? It's terrifyingly accurate. A man the size of a mountain, galloping at full speed, a lance as long as a tree aimed directly at your face, and the crowd cheering. This wasn't war, this was entertainment. And by the time this video is over, you will never look at a tournament scene the same way again, because the real history is darker, stranger, and more dramatic than anything George R.R. Martin invented. Stay with me. The detail about King Henry II is going to break your brain. If you're new here, this channel covers the real history behind Westeros every week. Subscribe now so you catch the next one. Let's get into it. 100 years before Game of Thrones. No dragons in the sky, no White Walkers in the north. Just knights, lords, mud, and ambition. Our man is Sir Duncan the Tall, Dunk, a hedge knight of unknown birth who just buried his master, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, and now rides alone toward the tourney at Ashford Meadow. No lord behind him, no house to vouch for him, no money, just a sword, a horse, and the desperate need to prove he belongs. The tournament is everything to a man like Dunk. It is his court of appeals, his lottery ticket, his only door. But to understand what that door really meant, we need to go back. Not to Westeros, to the real Middle Ages, because George R.R. Martin didn't build Dunk's world from fantasy. He built it from history. The medieval tournament was born in 11th century France, not as entertainment, but as a training ground for war. When knights had no battlefield to sharpen themselves on, they created their own. And those early tournaments? Nothing like what you imagine. They were called the mêlée. A mass cavalry battle between two opposing teams of knights fought across miles of open countryside, between actual villages, through actual fields. The goal: capture enemy knights, hold them for ransom, and walk away wealthy. The greatest knight who ever lived, William Marshal, 12th century England, built his entire fortune this way. He competed in over 500 tournaments. He was never once unhorsed, and he died peacefully in his bed at the age of 72, universally respected as the model of chivalry. But the church despised tournaments. Pope Innocent II banned them in 1130 CE and declared that any knight killed in one should be denied a Christian burial. Kings banned them too, because hundreds of armed, competitive noblemen gathered in one meadow was a political explosion waiting to happen. And yet, nobody stopped going, because the tournament wasn't just violence. At the tournament of Lagny-sur-Marne in 1179 CE, an estimated 3,000 knights attended a single event. That's not a sports match. That's a civilization. But here's what the paintings never show you. Here's what the illuminated manuscripts leave out. The part that nobody who actually competed in a tournament ever wanted to remember. The part about what a lance actually does to a human body at full speed. By the late 13th century, jousting, the one-on-one lance duel, had become the centerpiece of every great tournament. The arena was called the lists, a rectangle of packed earth or straw, roughly 100 to 200 meters long. A wooden barrier called the tilt ran down the middle, keeping the horses separated. Two knights launched from opposite ends and galloped toward each other at the combined speed of a car crash. The lances were 3 meters long, made of ash wood, deliberately hollowed to shatter on impact, fitted with a 3-pronged tip called a coronal designed to distribute the force rather than penetrate. In theory, points went to shattering lances, striking the helmet, or, most dramatically, unhorsing your opponent completely. The winner took everything: the loser's horse, armor, and often his freedom, until a ransom was paid. The jousting helmet was the notorious frogmouth, a slit so narrow a knight could only see by tilting his head forward into the charge. The moment he raised his head, his eyes were protected. But he was also flying blind. And here is something almost no one knows. Knights only had 3 lances each. After the lances were spent, it went to swords, on foot, in the middle of the field. The crowd loved that part most. I promised you something about King Henry II. Here it is. In 1390 CE, John de Hastings, Earl of Pembroke, one of England's most promising young noblemen, was killed in a practice joust. Not the actual tournament, the warm-up. A lance fragment through an unguarded moment, and a title died with him. The chronicler Matthew Paris documented how a knight named Roger de Leyburn killed his opponent at a tournament, and it was later discovered his lance had never been blunted. Not an accident, a murder dressed as sport. But the death that ended the golden age of jousting forever happened on June 30th, 1559. King Henry II of France, one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe, decided to joust in celebration of his daughter's wedding. His opponent's lance shattered against his visor. A splinter, barely the length of a finger, drove through the eye slit, pierced his brain. He died 10 days later, in agony. His 15-year-old son took the throne. France fractured, decades of catastrophic religious civil war followed. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the collapse of the Valois dynasty, all of it cascading from one tournament. One lance, one splinter, one empire destroyed. After that, no French king ever jousted again. Now, here's why any of this matters for Dunk. Because Dunk isn't a king. Dunk isn't even a lord. Dunk is something far more interesting and far more historically real than most viewers realize. In the real Middle Ages, not every knight had a castle. Below the great noble houses was a class of men known as landless knights, hedge knights, named for the fact that they slept under hedgerows because they had no manor house to shelter them. These were men who had been properly knighted, on a battlefield or by another knight, but held no lands, collected no rents, commanded no soldiers. They wandered the realm doing whatever a sword could earn: escort duty, garrison work, seasonal guard contracts. The tournament was their only chance at social mobility. Win a joust, capture a well-born opponent for ransom, impress a lord in the gallery, and your entire life could change in an afternoon. Martin captures this with brutal precision. Dunk sells his horse, Sweetfoot, whom he loves, just to afford new armor from the blacksmith Steely Pate, because arriving at Ashford in dented, ill-fitting armor means being turned away at the gate. He then faces a problem that was historically real. Without a lord to vouch for him, he cannot enter the lists. Tournament bylaws in the high medieval period required knights to prove their lineage and display their heraldic arms. A man with no coat of arms had no legal identity in the tournament world. So Dunk creates one, from scratch, an elm tree on a sunset field. That scene, a nameless man designing his own identity with a piece of charcoal, is one of the most quietly radical moments in the entire story. In a world built entirely on inherited bloodlines, Dunk is improvising himself into existence. Tournaments were never just combat. They were the medieval world's most powerful political theater. A lord who hosted a great tournament broadcast his wealth and loyalty to every man in the realm. Edward III of England used tournaments as propaganda, dressing participants in his own colors, staging themed events where knights costumed as the Knights of the Round Table, literally performing loyalty in public. For the Medici of Florence, tournament pageantry became so elaborate that Lorenzo de' Medici's personal standard for one tournament was designed by Leonardo da Vinci. At Ashford, every detail of this political theater is in play. The arrival of the Targaryen princes, Baelor, Maekar, and the vicious Aryan, isn't just dramatic spectacle. It's a statement of royal power broadcast to every lord in the Reach. Every man watching is being evaluated. For Dunk, getting Prince Baelor to vouch for him publicly is not a bureaucratic formality. It is a political earthquake. A member of the royal family choosing to stand behind a hedge knight of unknown birth in front of every lord in the kingdom is the kind of moment that rewrites a man's destiny. And it's exactly the kind of moment that real medieval history was full of. The tournament was where reputations were born and dynasties were made. Which is exactly why what happens next hits so hard. The tourney at Ashford doesn't stay a tournament when Aerion Targaryen, silver-haired, sadistic, and dangerously aware of his own bloodline, assaults the puppeteer girl Tanselle. Dunk intervenes. He physically strikes a prince of the royal blood. In Westerosi law, this is effectively treason. The penalty: death or the loss of his sword hand and right eye. His only recourse is the trial by combat. This too is historically real. In medieval law, when evidence was insufficient or an accusation disputed, the accused could demand that God decide the outcome through physical combat. Divine justice would theoretically grant strength to the righteous. In practice, it heavily favored whoever was bigger, better armed, and better trained. Dunk, facing Targaryen champions backed by royal gold, chooses to fight anyway, and then 5 knights step forward, one by one, to fight in his name: Baelor Breakspear, Robin Riesling, Humphrey Beesbury, Humphrey Harding, and the boy he's been traveling with, who turns out to be Aegon Targaryen. Egg. A prince. Every one of them risking their lives, their titles, their houses, for a hedge knight from Flea Bottom who doesn't even have a real surname. That is not just great fiction. That is the best possible version of what a tournament could be. A moment where the rigid, inherited social order of the medieval world bends, just slightly, and lets one enormous, stubborn, decent man walk through. 5 tournament facts that your history teacher never told you. 1. Early tournaments were fought across miles of open countryside, not enclosed arenas, between actual villages. The entire landscape was the battlefield. 2. The word tournament comes from the Latin turnere, to turn, because knights wheeled their horses mid-charge to attack from new angles. 3. Women didn't just watch. They sponsored events, funded prize purses, and gave personal favors, scarves, veils, rings, to their chosen champions. Their approval was the unofficial social currency of the entire event. 4. Some knights competed in complete anonymity, deliberately. Men with criminal records, dishonorable reputations, or political enemies would compete behind plain, heraldically blank shields. No name, no house, just skill. 5. After Henry II of France died from a lance splinter through the visor in 1559, no French king ever jousted again. The most dangerous sport in the medieval world died with a king. And Westeros never got that memo. The tournament was the medieval world's greatest contradiction. A celebration of honor built entirely on violence. A path to glory paved with shattered bones and borrowed armor. A system that claimed to reward the best, while rigging itself completely in favor of the already powerful. And Dunk knew this. He wasn't naive. He knew that a hedge knight winning at Ashford wasn't supposed to happen. He knew the system wasn't built for him. He competed anyway. Because that is what the tournament always was. For real knights in real fields in 12th century France, just as much as for a fictional giant in a fictional meadow in the Reach. It was the one place where the story could still be rewritten. Where the wrong man could, just occasionally, win. That's the history George R.R. Martin is working with. Not just swords and armor, but the oldest human question in the world. What happens when a man with nothing fights a system built to break him? Now, here's where I want your answer in the comments. Was Dunk right to intervene for Tanselle, even knowing it could cost him everything? Or was he a fool who should have walked away? Put your answer below. I'll be reading every single one. And if this video gave you something, a new way to see what you're watching, subscribe, hit the bell, because next week we go even deeper. The real history of hedge knights, wandering swords, and the men medieval society tried its hardest to forget.